it feels like Brazil is kind of in this juxtaposition where it's very different from the rest of Latin America.
Yes,
And it
yes,
and it also feels like a lot of the people in Brazil are more American thinking, in a way that they're kind of like, we don't really love the government. They're kind of thinking about these things more. It's a
yeah,
little more Western focused, and then the government in Brazil seems a little more European. In that you mentioned they're limiting restrictions on speech because they
right,
don't want people to be online misinformation.
right,
Um, Something that we're seeing happen all over England at the moment.
yeah,
They're impeaching the incoming, hopefully incoming
yes,
new leader, somewhat like Le Pen in France. There's this kind of forces all pulling all over the
yeah.
place.
I think Brazil. It's a lot of Americans don't think of Brazil as the West, but Brazil is having the same. They are having the great war over the West that everyone else is having. The United States, Canada, England, Sweden,
Right.
and all losing to one degree or another. But I recently gave a talk at our church's missions conference, and it actually revolved around this idea. I think the last two great bastions of the West are the United States and Brazil. Um, you know, as a gospel believing Christian, I'm okay with the West dying because the kingdom of God will advance. But I don't want the West to die. It's
Right.
beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's worth fighting for, and we can all die on this battlefield, and that would be beautiful too. I'd rather win though. So, and as far as the differences of Brazil and the rest of Latin America go, there are some Spanish speaking Latin American countries that are profoundly Western or were. So I would put on that list countries like Chile, Argentina, Colombia.
Yeah.
And then there are others that from the beginning, from their inception, were profoundly not Western or layered over with Westernness. A lot of that just had to do with just raw populations, like Mexico and Peru,
Right.
millions upon millions and millions of indigenous, right? So it was never going to be a European society. It was going to be a converted indigenous society.
And because the Catholics converted, there was a lot of indigenous still in that conversion.
Still in the conversion, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's, besides the language thing, so Brazilians are not Hispanic because they're not from Hispania and they don't speak Hispanish. But they, of course, are Latin American. But if you say, with that, I mean, people from Quebec would be Latin American. Suriname would, or Dutch Guiana would not be Latin America. So there are just different ways of conceiving and labeling all these things. But Lusitanian Portuguese civilization and then Brazilian civilization is distinct enough from Spanish civilization. And then they followed their diverging paths that, Brazil is certainly unique in the Americas.
Do you see it following a similar path that the U.S. is currently following a year or two behind?
There's a lot of that, and there are a lot of jokes, in Brazilian society about Brazilians doing things 15 years after Americans do them, good or bad. I suppose it might depend on what you're trying to get to with that question, because I think that. So you and I are part of one of many movements and communities within American Christendom that is very dynamic and energetic. But the church is decadent, right? And that is, I would say, is the overall movement. That's fundamentally different from what's happening in Brazil. The church may be weaker down there right now, but it's on the ascendancy.
It's alive.
Yeah, and moving up. We're moving down. And so I actually really don't know how to predict it. Objectively, I think Christianity and Protestant Christendom down there is weaker. And they don't even, they're often so confused about which direction to turn to fight. They, have a lot of the same ineffectiveness as we do, but, they're growing up and we are growing old, and that's an important difference.